Hey there, welcome to Spectrum Pulse, where we talk about music, movies, art, and culture, and let's talk about something kind of stupid, but try to have some fun with it. February 12th, 2026, Sturgill Simpson takes to Twitter and announces his second album under the moniker Johnny Blue Skies, now with his backing band fittingly called The Dark Clouds.
The deepest circle of hell is reserved for betrayers and mutineers.
It's called Mutiny After Midnight, it is once again self-produced, and the press release emphasizes the sharp juxtaposition between the dark state of the world and the bright state of love, all of which he would bring together for a southern fried country rock album with a primary focus on groove. I also noted that he himself admitted many of the lyrics were written on the spot in the studio, often the same day once the groove was found, in order to see and harness my own neurodivergence and the weaponized autism of our collective members as a superpower in the studio. That's a concerning way to phrase that, but if it enabled him to be a little looser and funnier, I wasn't precisely against it. He also highlighted that thanks to his solo travels in France, he found himself inspired by how, when the French people found their rights being infringed, they would take to the streets, where the protests were infused with joy and music, an attitude that seems somewhat missed on this side of the Atlantic, which I happen to agree with, by the way. And then quoting him, "I now wake up every day with the sole intention of doing my best at what I'm best at, simply being a pirate."
It is my intention to commandeer one of these ships, pick up a crew and Tortuga, raid, pillage, plunder, and otherwise pilfer my Weasley black guts out.
He ends the announcement with, "So with all that all said, to any and all who see our flag flying off of your stern, know this, there'll be no quarter nor mercy offered nor granted." I should also note that about a week or so ago, United States Secretary of War Pete Hegseth proclaimed there would be no quarter, no mercy for our enemies in the war in Iran, where he rightly received backlash because, that's an international war crime. And given that Sturgill Simpson was in the Navy, he knows that. Yar, I guess. So okay, fresh off of his commitment to war crimes at sea, I found myself looking forward to a new Johnny Blue Skies album despite it all. Just shows how easy it is to manipulate the masses, and I can indeed be a part of the masses on occasion. You are not immune to propaganda, and nor am I, come to think of it. No, I didn't like Passage du Désir that much in 2024, but that was because Sturgill Simpson was making utterly milquetoast and goopy country soft rock with a dollop of Steely Dan, rather than kicking ass and taking names, which he's much better at. Not helped by the whole French finding himself press run in that year that conveniently skated over, the wife and kids on the other side of the Atlantic that he may have left behind. Did I dwell on that element a little bit more than I maybe should have in my review, given his own morally ambiguous framing of the music? Okay, maybe. Did it still taint the emotional experience of the album for me, especially when the vocal delivery and the hooks were far weaker than usual? Most certainly. Still not a great project. But surely if I declare the right of parlay...
Parlay? That's the one! Parlay! 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 Down to the depths, whatever mutton they thought of parlay! That would be the French.
We might be able to converse with some degree of levity, maybe even some frivolity. And if Sturgill Simpson was looking to turn things up a notch with a nautical theme calling back to the fantastic A Sailor's Guide to Earth from 2016, with a splash of the excellent Sound and Fury, yeah, I'll admit it. I was intrigued. But almost immediately, I heard in the wind a bit of reticence, some of which I agreed with, some of which was plainly codswallop from landlubbers who wouldn't be fit to swab the decks now, would they? I wasn't averse to Sturgill Simpson opting for a more ruckus album. It's a good lane for him. But it's also been a decade since his twin peaks of 2014's Metamodern Sounds in Country Music or 2016's A Sailor's Guide to Earth. And in the years since, he's proven as a writer, composer, and producer to have wild swings of quality. And while I'll absolutely roll my eyes surprise at anyone who wants to be annoying calling out the French protest as a critique of Sturgill Simpson's inspiration if he was now partnering with an offshoot of Atlantic Records in order to sell this project after aggressively salting the earth and the explosive exit going from that label at the end of the 2010s, beginning of the 2020s. That gave me pause. Apparently he made peace with the new management over there, so now he's gotten a chord. Okay, look, I told you all these references are going to be kind of stupid. Sail with me on this. If you want someone to be somewhat serious and professional here, go watch Conway Titty's Breakdown. Link in the description. She does good work. But what drew the most attention from the press and myself was Sturgill Simpson's announcement that the album would not be released on streaming at all, or at least not at the initial point, instead only available via cassette, CD, or vinyl. Now this prompted a lot of derisive scoffing and then backlash to that backlash, but I think there'd be a certain bit of honor to sticking to what could be purchased by the gold up front.
The gold calls to us.
Yes, you can make the tired Garth Brooks comparison and how this is limiting Sturgill Simpson's audience by way of Johnny Blue Skies by pushing it all to streamers, but A, I would put money on this album eventually winding up on streaming eventually, or digital sales probably sometime in the summer. My guess is August. B, Sturgill Simpson's audience tends to be a little older anyway, and the diehards would have no problem shelling out for a physical release, and that's where Simpson's gonna make the majority of his money anyway. And C, did any of you actually remember what happened with Garth Brooks? He tried to make his own streaming service exclusively for him. He sold his last limited edition set exclusively through Bass Pro Shops. There's Sturgill Simpson's neurodivergence. Welcome on board, buddy. And then there's whatever madness that Garth Brooks has. Now, as a critic, is it gonna make my life more difficult not having the digital version up front? Well, yeah, but Sturgill Simpson's been making my life complicated for years now. Sometimes you gotta roll with the high tide until you actually catch the wind. February 19th, 2026, we get the track list of 9 songs. One that immediately draws a lot of eyes is the opening track, Make America Fuk Again, a take on the popular reactionary slogan popularized down south, prompting the expected meltdown from people who thought just because Sturgill Simpson went on Joe Rogan a couple of times, and Joe Rogan actually featured doing an Alex Jones impression on Sound and Fury, that his politics aligned with theirs. Or, you know, all those guys who love their outlaw Jason Country albums while they be grilling on the patio. Truthfully, I don't think he's much on the left here either. He's a little too contrarian, broadly, erratically anti-establishment given all the stunts he's pulled over the years. Very Gen X in that regard. And right now, one side takes the mockery way harder than the other for a change. It's kind of nice. And this is something I want to hammer on. For as much as Sturgill Simpson can be taken seriously when he wants to, either under his own name or the Johnny Blue Skies moniker, I mean, his vocal timbre used to convey a heavier gravitas, it's what has made some of his best songs so resonant. He can also make a rollicking damn good time. He can be loose and funny. Sea Stories remains one of my favorite songs of his to this day. And if there's one thing where self-serious critics and audiences can kind of get themselves into trouble, it's not having a sense of humor, nor acknowledging when an artist is making a joke or taking the piss. Let me ask you this. How often do critics acknowledge in a review when something's actually kind of funny, made them laugh, or put one of those funnier songs on a year-end list? I'd argue it's a bit of a lost art to categorize one's irreverence and then make the trickier value judgment if the humor lands or doesn't and why. Hell, it's not just me as a critic. A lot of establishment critics or establishments in general struggle with it. See also the stylism of this video. February 27th, 2026. He posts, treasure hunt alert, 10 copies on shelves at your local record shop in select markets. Run, bitches, I am the captain now. Well then.
When you marooned me on that godforsaken spit of land, you forgot one very important thing, mate. I'm Captain Jack Sparrow.
March 1st, 2026. Sturgill Simpson invites folks to an online listening party at noon Central Time. He then rickrolls them. And then later that day, well, yeah, he posted the entire project on YouTube on his channel. One extended video running nearly 45 minutes, nearly a full 2 weeks before the official release date. He just put it all out there.
You are without doubt the worst pirate I've ever heard of.
but you have heard of me.
We'll get to the actual content of the album much later on, but this release strategy had a lot of folks confused. You specifically doubled down on only initial physical release in your marketing and promotion, and yet you put the album up yourself on YouTube weeks early, arguably the streamer that pays out the worst, and you may not have even monetized it? Why? Well, on first glimpse, it actually kind of makes a lot of sense. That contrarian streak has not gone away from him, and if he wanted to take the power over his own release of his own music while still getting the broadest distribution possible, why not leak it early and drive up some of the buzz? Indeed, on March 2nd, the following day, GQ put out the article, "No matter what time it is, it's garage beers o'clock in the Mutiny After Midnight YouTube comment section." Yeah, I have to stress this. This is GQ reporting on the events of a YouTube comment section. So all y'all get to work down there. If entertainment journalism has fallen that far from GQ, I'm sure we can all catch a line if the comments in this video get mighty spicy. But it's certainly the most buzz that Sturgill Simpson has gotten outside of the hipster country ecosystem in some time. Yeah, the first Johnny Blue Skies project got some of it and some critical acclaim that I'd argue it didn't really deserve, but not to the same volume. But that also requires that you take Sturgill Simpson at his word that he planned all this.
But that still leaves us with the problem of me standing on some beach with naught but a name, and your word, it's the one I need.
And I'm not sure I'd be taking the word of a mutineer as Bond. And for other country journalists who are more Sturgill Simpson skeptical, especially having watched him pull this bullshit time and time again before, there might be a deeper reason. There might be more going on here. March 7th, 2026. The indie country blog Saving Country Music publishes a pretty solid piece called Separating the Signal from the Noise of Sturgill Simpson's Mutiny Leak, where the long and short of it is that, well, Sturgill Simpson may have had a more business-driven reason to leak that record early. And it goes back to that whole treasure hunt tweet a couple weeks earlier. Sure, it was a cool way to activate one's fan base, but it also meant that if dozens, if not hundreds or thousands of copies of the album were now circulating in the wild, even if they were just physical, that might mean some enterprise and folk might want to upload a full copy of said record onto many a dubiously legal site, ports outside the jurisdiction of the authorities at sea. Now that's mighty interesting, because Sturgill Simpson's audience is predominantly older, the sort who would actually shell out money to buy physical copies. But not so old that they wouldn't remember the old days when a bay may have held pirates, where one can ride the torrent to plunder. It might be a while since some of us fired up uTorrent, but we still remember how. Hell, it wouldn't even need to go that far. If you had a copy of the CD, some of us might still have CD burners to just rip onto iTunes or, God forbid, Windows Music Player. It might give us a little twinge of nostalgia, remembering when we still felt something and our knees still worked, and how some things, they always seem to come on back.
Aye, but that's a gamble of long odds, ain't it? There's never a guarantee of coming back. But passing on, that's dead certain.
So, the YouTube drop, it's thus framed as more one of commerce rather than that of whimsy, where the physical leak got just well out of hand, and in order to stem the rushing tide of the internet and save his first week's sales, Sturgill Simpson decides to cut off all the buccaneers at the knees and then leak the album himself. Atlantic's PR team then launches the full media profile a couple of weeks early, hence GQ writing a whole article based off of a YouTube comment section. No, I'm not over that, and anyone who'd still be leaking the album would be caught with their dicks in the sales. I'm fairly certain that last one's not a pirate phrase, you get my point. Now the question here is whether or not I believe him, and I'm genuinely not sure. A part of me wants to believe that Sturgill Simpson wanted to leak the album himself. He would later say so, we'll get to it. But if he's working with a major label in any capacity and major label distribution, and they might already be a little nervous about the first week sales numbers given the physical only push, a quick gimmick in order to juice the PR, especially as this project is released under Johnny Blue Skies and not Sturgill Simpson, so you don't get the same name recognition.
We don't have to outrun them long, just long enough.
This is further supported by Sturgill Simpson actually taking down the full leak on March 9th, 2026, after some very positive buzz had been flowing openly from many a critical outlet and across social media. And now you might proceed with your physical-only plan, backed by what seems to be genuine grassroots word of mouth. He had a lot of buzz in his favor, some of his best reviews in years. Now, was all this some savvy marketing scheme in order to drive up more buzz for Sturgill Simpson, when getting attention for a pure physical release is sailing against the tide?
You've been planning this from the beginning. Ever since you learned my name. Yeah.
Truthfully, you could go either way. I think there's some merit in trying to cover one's wake in the water if the pirates be chasing you down, but I don't think I buy that assertion coming from Saving Country Music in full, and I quote, "It would be predicated on an outright verifiable lie that could very well fall into the purview of the Federal Trade Commission if complaints were brought, or a class action lawsuit from fans who pre-ordered physical copies was filed, however unlikely this might be." And I want to stress how unlikely it might be, because the only people buying a pre-order of a Sturgill Simpson offshoot project, the second album under that name, I might add, they're going to be the die-hard fans. Where even with the inflated price point of physical copies these days, the album would have to be catastrophically bad to inspire them to turn so hard on Sturgill Simpson that they would file a class action lawsuit with the FTC, especially when said leak is then taken down just over a week later after some of the best buzz that he has received in years. Let's be reasonable here. Would Atlantic potentially consider themselves liable and get a bit antsy? That's possible. But given Sturgill Simpson's contrarian and opportunistic streak, this feels like killing two birds with one shot. Maybe not the intended marketing scheme, but more of a pivot where the odds wound up rolling in his favor. And let's not act like this is anything that new. Artists do impromptu listening parties all the damn time. Sturgill Simpson himself planned for one before leaking the whole album online, which only served to drive more buzz. And he never explicitly said that it would only be a physical release, or that it wouldn't wind up on streaming at some point. It's almost inevitable that it will. Again, I'm predicting August this year. Now, is it earlier than the average release party might be, and the leak extended a little longer? Yes. But if anything, it seems like a modern masterstroke if you know your target audience and the demographics are a little older, a little bit less online. We're in between taking this ship to port or driving kids to soccer practice, let's be real. You might not be available in a specific moment to catch the album, and in an era where release buzz can fade in a couple of hours, let alone a few days, keeping it alive for over a week is damn near unprecedented. Something where other country acts or just independent acts might take notice of this. I know some of them already have.
That's got to be the best pirate I've ever seen.
So it would seem.
March 13th, 2026. Johnny Blue Skies and the Dark Clouds release Mutiny After Midnight to solid, if not exceptional reviews. We'll get to mine in a little bit. And given that I did not have a physical copy, I didn't initially hear it. Yeah, that's the thing. I kept meaning to get on that YouTube link, but when I finally got some time, the leak was taken down. Just my luck. Granted, I did find a way of hearing it early within the past week, and I do indeed have some thoughts prepared, but it also serves to show that sometimes you be caught out in stormy weather. You can't always take it into shore. But on this day, Sturgill Simpson takes a bit of a victory lap with a statement on Instagram, thanking a lot of the fans and the critics and capturing the fun of that whole moment. And while he says they originally planned that physical-only release, at least for the first 4 to 6 weeks, again, there was a timeline here, shows solidarity with the indie record shops and the tangible connection with the physical media, which again, I really do get. I made a whole 3-hour video essay a little bit around that subject. Please go watch that. Did not get enough attention in 2024. To quote, "There were some hiccups and some opportunists, thus some in the moment adjustments that only led to more fun and chaos. Personally, I'm just here for the chaos. Plus, I always really wanted to leak my own record. This is where he also basically confirms my assertion around the extension of the buzz of that album. Without the usual run of interviews, TV performances, singles, music videos, playing the whole mainstream game, or an ounce of marketing outside a steady stream of stupid-ass memes, he's now possibly having the biggest week of his career. And according to the Billboard numbers, which have come in, he absolutely did. He debuted at number 3 on the Billboard 200 entirely on physical sales. That matches A Sailor's Guide to Earth. He also states that he'll probably be on iTunes at some point, told you, or streaming with some bonus tracks, and he doesn't really mind how you hear it at the moment, but he advises that you go grab a copy and find a place to crank it with some friends or even strangers. You might even get laid. More on that in a little bit. March 14th, 2026. But it's not all sunshine and roses here, because over this weekend, some enterprising vagabond puts the album up on Bandcamp illegally while claiming to be Sturgill Simpson. And he and his team were having none of that.
They're stealing our shit! Bloody pirates!
Blasting it on Instagram as impersonation, he followed up with a statement on that platform that he was in contact with Bandcamp behind the scenes and all appropriate parties in order to find credit card and transaction information, alongside IP addresses to track down who that fake seller was. And to quote, "All those affected will be refunded, and the miserable shit asses responsible will be keel-hauled." Now, for those of you unaware, to be keel-hauled is to be tied to a rope, thrown overboard, and dragged underneath the ship's keel. That is the central point under a ship. You're learning things today. Where you'll likely suffer all manner of death and possibly dismemberment due to getting repeatedly bashed all over the body by a ship traveling at several knots, or all manner of coral embankments and surprised fish. It's maritime punishment, that sort of thing happens. Now, incidentally, while Sturgill Simpson was once again threatening some brand of war crime with a lot of old-fashioned maritime punishment practiced by the English and Dutch, my partner and I took a day to ourselves and we actually watched Pirates of the Caribbean: Curse of the Black Pearl. Yeah, the movie's still awesome, with an amazingly tight screenplay, great direction, and outside of the Johnny Depp of it all, it remains a rollicking and immensely quotable great time, if you can't tell. It's also aged ridiculously well. I don't really have much of a reason to bring this up other than the fact that I had a good time. I think all of you should know that. It's important to recognize that I'm having fun on this occasionally. It's a good thing to have fun, right?
But why is the rum gone?
But this is also where I started wondering, why were so many people trying to leak Sturgill Simpson's physical-only album? Because there have been highly exclusive releases in genre-bending country music before, and they did not suffer the same rash of leaks. And I got a perfect example from just a couple of years back. Eric Church. Mid-April 2021, Eric Church releases the double album Heart and Soul, a distinctly good but not great album, unless you heard the And EP, which was exclusively released to the Church Choir Fan Club. 6 songs that also happen to be one of the best EPs of that year in any genre, and arguably the best individual project that Eric Church has ever made. Funnily enough, it's got a lot of similar sounds to this project here too. And here's the fascinating thing. Between the time that it was first released exclusively in April 2021, and then when he finally put it on streaming in August of 2022, I did not see a digital leak of the And EP. Now, I had my digital copy very early, courtesy of buying the vinyl, download codes, but the fact remains that Eric Church's fan base, despite being multiple times larger than Simpson's, never leaked that EP. For over a year. Now, the fan bases are different. Both are older, but you could argue Church's fans might be even less online, a little more conservative, maybe more willing to hold the line, or simply that a bonus EP, despite a lot of critical acclaim, is not going to receive the same amount of attention from Pirates as a whole-ass album, especially if the physical pressings were limited and then resellers might want to make a buck. Even though I do appreciate the irony that Eric Church actually has a degree in marketing that he got before making music, and yet it was Sturgill Simpson who pulled off one of the great heists of this year. And some of it might come down to just the mercenary irreverence of his behavior now being reflected by the audience. You get the audience you deserve. Not saying he only has himself to blame, but it's not remotely surprising. So, let me start by saying that I think Mutiny After Midnight is pretty great. Probably the most I've liked a Sturgill Simpson album since Sound and Fury, maybe even more so. And I can absolutely hear the argument that it's going to make a healthy number of year-end lists, and for good reason, but it's also not without flaws, nor do I think it reaches Sturgill Simpson's peak material. And the more listens I gave it, the more I was wondering if I was just appreciating the album less for what it was, and more for who was inevitably going to piss off. We'll get to all that in a second, but you know what, let's actually start with what the album actually is, because there's a very real chance you did not hear it if you didn't catch the leak or the physical version. It's basically 70s funk and disco by way of country rock with a few glances at the Rolling Stones, and it's worth highlighting that on some level, it's all a throwback. Sturgill Simpson's meta-modernist side has not gone away anywhere, and walking that tight balance between something that has its more direct historical roots, a more direct emotional appeal to that nostalgia, and then the elements of winking deconstruction piled on top of it. It's worth highlighting that there were country acts who borrow from both funk and disco throughout the late 60s and early 70s. This is not new, but they also did it at different times and for very different reasons. Country funk was a way more geographically diffuse scene across the late 60s and early 70s, with some of the genre experimentation a half step away from the nascent outlaw scene, but country disco was the attempt to merge the dance records of the late 70s with a little bit more rollicking twang, and it was done by Music Row in Nashville in order to get in on the money of the disco bubble before it popped. More importantly, while both genre crossovers dabbled in the sound, how much they actually brought in some of the socially charged subject matter from distinctly black genres into the music, that was much dicier. If you remember country funk or country disco, you probably remember a lot of the baby-making jams as the sound eventually mutated into being a half-step removed from pornography. Believe it or not, it's actually relevant talking about this album. Not anything with serious progressive ideas that would get the people going. If Simpson had that postmodern angle in the music, it's bringing both the sex and the politics to bear on the same country funk disco album, which really should have happened 50 years ago. And the politics are worth mentioning because you don't start off the album with "Make America Fuk Again" if you're not looking to make a point. It's something of a thesis statement of the album, and as such, naturally, we're going to be talking about the other political songs here first. The most obvious being the chugging but oddly abbreviated country rock jam of Excited Delirium, a widely discredited term utilized by police in order to justify excessive force against someone by saying that they have excited delirium and the police felt threatened. And when the song blurs together references between police brutality and ICE, because really, how different are they when we are talking about militarized, undertrained, frequently corrupt and unaccountable institutions that wind up terrorizing many of the same people that they're attempting to protect and serve? Well, it's made pretty obvious on what Sturgill Simpson's trying to get across. But that's arguably the most focused political song on the album, the most precise, because the penultimate and final songs, they set up the stakes, or at least try to, especially the closing cut, Ain't That a Bitch, which is a broadly painted anti-establishment screed going at people from the treasonous and fashy POS in chief down south to the wealthy enablers that drive division across society instead of coming together for love and harmony because they want to capitalize and make all the money on playing the divide. What's very telling is that Sturgill Simpson knows how these wealthy oligarchs talk down to rural folks, call them hick lib instead of hillbilly, and his very graphic description of torture across that third verse, there is a sardonic focus in a lot of that sadism, but also how his own success could have bought him a ticket off, but would he really want to take it when he could be trying to drop knowledge? Or the process to get free would be exclusionary around a lot of the people that makes the art he loves?
As if I could be bought for such a low price.
This is also where a few major criticisms of this album do materialize. The lyrics feel thrown together pretty fast, It's got a good sense of humor, but a cast-off flow. It could be more pithy and effective with more time and refinement. But the larger issue, it's tone, again, because once again Sturgill Simpson's ending the album on a rather dark note that doesn't really match the timbre of the rest of the album. Even his best projects, they have this problem, this weird choice to go for the downbeat ending to accentuate how nothing ever changes, nothing gets better, the rich get richer and the poor stay the same, ain't that a bitch? A nihilism that can also feel very reminiscent of the 1970s or just Gen X in general, and it wasn't a good look then or now, especially if you're trying to inspire change. It's a weird note to end on. But what change is Simpson trying to sell? What does he really want? Well, this is where we get to the whole sex side of this album, where Make America Fuk Again and Everyone Is Welcome feel like two sides of the same coin. Where in disillusionment with driving each other apart, the answer should be, well, coming together. Likely multiple times in a night for everyone involved, if you know what you're doing.
I don't know what you mean.
Oh, I think you do.
It's a rare album that evokes a lot of 1970s sleaze that treads right into the pornographic without feeling that exploitative. Utterly ridiculous, sure, the hook of Stay On That is utterly buck wild, especially for country standards, but operating on the principle that if you own it with a lot of swagger and bring your own charisma to bear, who the hell cares? It's why most of Simpson's ridiculous lines on this album work at all. Indeed, if Mutiny After Midnight has any great strength, it's riding and owning that groove, the jam that sprawls out in a haze of tight bass lines and solos, reveling in the disco tradition of letting the dance record spin all the way out, like the fantastic sax and guitar solos on Don't Let Go and Everyone Is Welcome, the minor key smoky vibes of Viridescent and Venus, the former with some incredibly intentional guitar work, one of the best solos I've heard in a long time, the latter with a stellar bass line, or the razor-tight whirring funk of the lead-off single Situation that somehow pulls off doubling the tempo for the extended outro. And not for nothing, while we're here, if you happen to know anything about how music in pornography actually works, the history, often stealing from and sampling loops from psychedelic rock, lounge music, and especially funk, which became cheaper to license in the 1970s, assuming they weren't being outright stolen, before electronic music became the go-to for porn of the 80s and 90s, it is an easy parallel to draw, and there is something communal and coming together. Now, how seriously you're going to take this, that's a bit of a moving target, even as someone who's an easy sell on this sound and texture. If you've seen enough bad parodies of the 70s, or cheap riffs on that sound and sleazy vibe, or you happen to remember the era without rose-colored glasses, or every man who thinks he's a badass for emulating that, or hell, just go watch Anchorman, which that film's over 20 years old now, lampooning a decade 30 years earlier, you might find it all a little too silly or ridiculous, or just not especially cool to buy into when Simpson's mostly playing it straight. Self-aware about the silliness, but he still kind of wants you to buy in. But let's flip it the other way, because why not buy in?
You long to do what you want to do because you want it. To act on selfish impulse. You want to see what it's like.
Because you can argue there is something quasi-revolutionary in Sturgill Simpson accentuating sex so much as fuel for the politics. It's not new, but you'd be surprised how much the old provocation still works. The most memorable lines on Make America Fuk Again are, "I got that Hunter Biden energy, I'll make a hooker fuck around and fall in love," which only serves as a potent reminder of when Hunter Biden apparently tried to play Fleet Foxes while receiving a lap dance. I'm assuming something from Helplessness Blues, not Crack Up, though that would be funny, where fellow sleazeball Josh Tillman played drums, more on him in a bit, but also Hunter Biden not only supposedly treated the sex workers pretty well when he was on his benders, he was not identified in the Epstein files. Doesn't that say something about how sex is framed in that circle versus others? Let's go further. In Stephen M. Dusner's review of the album for Pitchfork, he highlighted how folks are just not having nearly as much sex in these recent years, including married couples, especially Gen Z, where it still feels like the monocles start popping when pop stars try to show off their sexual, queer, or kinky side. I feel obliged to bring up that when I last talked about Sabrina Carpenter and Man's Best Friend in my full review, my issues issues were never the sex, nor the kink, especially when across the content of the album, Carpenter was having way less of it than you would expect. It was the execution of that exploration, and a lot of the comedy that just didn't land for me. And not for nothing, on Everyone is Welcome, Simpson shows an acceptance of queerness that certainly spits in some faces with life's better fluid like sexuality. On a verse that's all about having foursomes, you kinda have to be a little fluid to go there. Hell, let's go further. Have you ever noticed that a lot of the manosphere types, yes, unofficial sequel to my last video, please go watch that too, those guys don't ever seem to like or enjoy sex so much as just using it for a dominance game, largely in one-upmanship, targeting other men. It's certainly how the POS in chief down south seems to view it. Maybe it's because the steroids tend to mean that it stops working down there, but for as much as that band of brothers wants to talk about getting laid, there's precious little that comes of follow-through, of enjoying or exploring sex for its own sake, more education around it, exploring your body, what you know, what you like. Hell, many of them often wind up the most sex negative, or promoting some of the most confused or asinine ideas about the bedroom. Hey guys, does having sex with a woman make you gay? And when you pair that with the whole moral majority evangelical conservatism that wants to outlaw this sort of material entirely, who would have turned up their nose at this material both in the 70s and now? Well, Simpson might as well be smacking them in the face with a used condom. Don't think about that too hard, I certainly didn't.
This is madness.
This is politics.
Now, for the record, I'm on the side of a lot of sex positivity, decriminalization of sex work, exploring the material conditions that lead to unsafe sex work, destigmatizing kink, and a more healthy conversation about ethical pornography that is fundamentally an intersectional and workers' rights issue globally. And I'll also be real, Sturgill Simpson did not make that album, not by a long shot. And indeed, if I'm going to highlight another, albeit slight shortcoming here, something that I would have liked to see, it comes with the question of whether Sturgill Simpson is the best guy in order to sell that message. Whether this contrarianism is only just playing to his passing fancy and entertainment, or something deeper with a little bit more collective purpose. This goes back to the balancing act that Sturgill Simpson and Johnny Blue Skies has with theme, because he knows that someone in his position is gonna reap the most benefits either in selling the sex positivity or just reveling in all the hedonism. And while I believe it is genuine coming from him, there's going to be some who will see an echo of the hippies who embraced a lot of the flower power more because they wanted the free love down the line instead of actually having any idealism. Even if I will give him credit for Don't Let Go as the extended apology to his wife for, well, I'm imagining most of the past couple of years, which accentuates how much of this is selling a certain degree of fantasy, given he is a married man. But this raises an odd question. Sturgill Simpson might have some younger crossover, and there is a movement around Gen Z or Gen Alpha who are apparently seeking out more physical media, probably a little oversold by some of the music press that desperately wants to project onto it. But is he really getting the penetration, pun intended, with that audience in snubbing the streamers outside the limited leak on YouTube, where the release here feels more like playing to a lot of aging hipsters or folks my age who are more than happy to write about him and then have the money to buy into that system? And furthermore, while there will be folks younger than me who might idolize Sturgill Simpson on TikTok or other social media platforms for this swagger and groove, a new packing of nostalgia for which they cannot possibly remember, how many are just going to look at Simpson and see the line between the cool uncle, the creepy uncle, or the sad uncle just blur together? How much are they going to believe any of this?
Scarlet! Not sure I deserve that. What? I may have deserved that.
And moreover, while we are on the topic of physicals, given that Sturgill Simpson usually turns in a different master based off of the format, given what happened to Sound and Fury, where the streaming version is dramatically different than what you get on wax, the vinyl is actually pretty great, the production's way better. Well, I did have my own copy acquired through dubious legality, I wanted to check into that here too, and thus on short notice, I had to acquire the vinyl. Not that the production of Mutiny from the stream version was bad by any means. It's got that smeared over, oversaturated blend of guitars and keys and horns that can feel a little bit bricked out and leave Sturgill Simpson a bit swamped and lo-fi midway back, but the grooves are killer. It's refreshingly organic all the way down, especially the percussion, and there is a greater sense of dynamics than it's going to get credit. But oh boy, if you have an opportunity to get this on wax, do so. The texture is amazing. And that prompted another question. Tariffs.
Port tariffs, berthing fees, wharf handling, and heaven help us, pilotage. Are we all to work for the East India Trading Company then?
If you've been buying vinyl in or outside of the United States the past year or so, this has been one of the most exasperating price hikes in order to deal with. And you would think, given all the pirate branding, that he might be one to sidestep certain mercantile restrictions. Certainly would be daring. But not to fear, I did find my copy at a more reasonable price than I expected, about 40 bucks Canadian. And then I discovered that it was pressed in Poland, and I have to wonder if Atlantic may have engaged in certain mercantile subterfuge in their global distribution. Perhaps competitive pricing with the recognition that physical-only sales, they have to be priced to move. Then I realized I might be taking all this a little bit too seriously when I found the vinyl sleeve and realized it's a literal painted crotch shot. One side for the ladies, the other for the gentlemen. Come on, folks, let's not take this all that seriously. So, where in all heaven and hell do we go from here? Well, it was thinking back to that Hunter Biden reference and Fleet Foxes and Helplessness Blues and by extension Josh Tillman, aka Father John Misty, another artist in the 2010s who, after playing to a certain traditionalism, slipped into a wildly silly retro 1970s metamodernist framing where he could seem like a parody of himself, riding sexual provocation, drug abuse, and political commentary that tilts towards nihilism and a lot more provocation, yet occasionally struck real moments of poignancy. I mean, it's an archetype that relies on a certain, let's call it tempestuous relationship with its own privilege to function, that knows that a lot of burly dudes that idolize it are going to miss the subtleties of the point, yet the artists themselves often give the impression that they themselves may have underthought the joke, or lack thereof.
Why doesn't your compass work?
My compass works fine.
Because you and I are alike. And there will come a moment when you have a chance to show it. To do the right thing.
I love those moments. I like to wave at them as they pass by.
And yet somehow, it runs on enough performative sizzle and swell and sheer craft that it almost stops mattering. And you got great art along the way. You kind of have to meet it where it is. And while there's a part of me that knows, deep down, Mutiny After Midnight was capitalizing on a moment. It might be too underwritten to age all that well, too derivative of a past I'm familiar with, or it might be riding the hype of an inspired promo run. You still actually have to put it out, make it work. It's rare I spend so much time talking about the marketing of an album, but doing enough to capture and sell the moment and have it stick the landing requires genuine skill, especially if you have to find a way to turn the ship around by dropping the starboard anchor and hoping it doesn't rip your hull asunder. So much of modern music discourse surrounds what we want specific artists to do in their art when we miss the moment when they actually do it, or do something interesting that we didn't expect, or when we'd rather disparage the move for not being all the way there rather than accept the gamble of actually trying when they're going to get backlash anyway, especially when many won't take those chances. I commented in my last video how dispiriting it can feel when you're working uphill in a system that's designed to disadvantage those who are not playing the game, or playing the game but looking to make the rules a little bit better and thus undermining themselves. And I think there are some who see what Sturgill Simpson's doing with Johnny Blue Sky and might find it galvanizing, while also acknowledging he's taken every advantage that's given to him, both fairly or otherwise. Are some afforded more advantages in a bad system than others? And is Sturgill Simpson one of those people? Absolutely. And can it feel incredibly frustrating when he seemingly might squander that talent on his own whims and fancies? You bet.
You cheated.
Pirate.
But I'd rather see him take those advantages to inspire more irreverence, joy, fun, and a path through the passage for those who can follow in his wake. Maybe do even more. Well, either way, so much of this is about making the most of the time we have and the moments we have it. Art might live on, but nobody lives forever. And for Sturgill Simpson or Johnny Blue Skies, whatever moniker he comes up with next for him and his motley crew, this wound up one hell of a mutiny, where if we're going to hell for it, we're going down swinging.
You look bloody awful. What are you doing here? You hired me. I can't help it if your standards are lax.
You smell funny.